What's up, sports history fan? Dana Augusta here of the Historically Speaking Sports Podcast. Ever wish you can get behind the scenes access to the Hockey Hall of Fame and dive into the untold stories that shaped the game? Then you need to check out Hockey Hall of Fame True Stories Part 2 by Eric Zweig. Eric's latest book is packed with wild, unexpected tales from epic rivalries and game-changing moments to quirky incidents like polo injuries and snowblower mishaps. Eric Zweig's impeccable research and passion for the sport of hockey will whisk you through the NHL's early years, the origins of the Three Stars tradition, and how hockey first hit the airwaves. Plus, you get fresh takes on legends like Wayne Gretzky, Bobby Hall, and Joe Sakic. Hockey Hall of Fame True Stories 2 is available now wherever you get your books. Grab your copy and get ready to dive deep into the heart of the game.
Hello, this is Ross Bliley from the podcast Pigskin Tales. This podcast is sponsored by Sterling Soap Company. With products sold throughout 41 locations around the globe, Sterling Soap Company has a unique assortment of products to choose from for your loved one for the holidays. Handmade artisan soaps created by Roderick and Amanda Lovin since 2012, these products are affordable and provide great value. Act now and save on your shipping costs. If you purchase $75 or more, your shipping cost is free in the United States. Shop now online at sterlingsoap.com.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com.
Hello, old sports, and welcome to the Hello, Old Sports podcast on the Sports History Network. We are rapidly approaching 100 episodes of the Hello, Old Sports podcast. In just about 4 years, we've been doing this deep in the heart of the COVID pandemic in right about this time in the year 2020, and looking forward to seeing what the future would hold. But I want to say thank you all for listening to almost 100 episodes, and we're planning to do a little bit of a special retrospective episode for our 100th episode coming up over the next month or two. I am Dan Newman. I'm joined as always by my brother and co-host Andrew Newman. And Andrew, how are you doing tonight?
I'm doing well, Dan. It's the best time of year, or approaching the best time of year for sports. As we record this in early October, we got lots of different sports either going on or about to begin, and the baseball playoffs in full swing, which is something we're going to talk a lot about tonight.
Yes. This is my favorite month. My favorite month in general, October, but definitely my favorite month for sports between football, baseball, and now that the schedules have been spread out, you kind of get the decent chunk of the beginning of the winter sports of both the NBA and the NHL, college football. So just a lot going on. And we thought it would be fun. We've previously done episodes on the best NBA finals. We did the best NFC and AFC conference championship games. And we also did the best and worst Super Bowls for in history all over the last couple of years. And so we thought, with October upon us, and this will hopefully come out just around the time of the World Series, we thought it would be fun to tackle the big one and talk about the best World Series of all time. It's a little bit more arduous of a task. Super Bowls only go back to 1966. NBA Finals only to about 1946 or 47. The World Series goes all the way back to 1903, so it's a little bit more daunting of a task for us, but I think we're up for it.
Yeah, and we kind of put a little bit of a modifier on it, or unless that went out the window, but we're going to basically just each pick one from each decade, compare, and if not, because we don't have the time to go through each of these one by one and weigh their relative merits against each other.
This is true. So that's what we did. We started with the 1900s and all the way up to the 2020s. And
you started in 1903.
Where did you start?
You didn't start with the pre-1903 World Series?
I did not look at those. Did you actually look at those?
No, I did not.
In the 1880s and 1890s, there were the pre-1900 World Series, which for a time was the American Association against the National League, and then in the 1890s, it was the Temple Cup. It was just the two best teams in the National League facing off in a postseason series. We've done quite a few episodes on 19th century baseball. We did an episode on King Kelly. We did an episode on the 1890s Baltimore Orioles. Both of those touched pretty heavily on these early World Series. So if you're looking for that, go ahead and check those out. I am sure that at some point in the future we will do more episodes on these topics, on the pre-1900 baseball, pre-1900 postseason. But yes, we have just stuck to the commonly known World Series, which is the 1903 and on American League versus National League World Series.
Yeah, so we'll take it decade by decade. Do you want to just jump right in? I figured what I can do as we start each decade is just kind of read the World Series results from each year in the decade we're talking about, and then go from there, if that makes sense.
We just give like 50 seconds of history here. National League came into existence in 1876. There had been other professional baseball leagues in the past that sort of in history has been identified as a major league. There were other major leagues. We talked about the American Association and Players League, Union Association, these that kind of popped up for a year or two. By the year 1900, the National League is the only major league in professional baseball play a postseason against each other to determine the world champion of professional baseball. And only twice has that series not taken place since 1904, the very next year, when the New York Giants refused to play I believe it was the Boston Red Sox, and then 1994 when there was the player strike. Came close some other times because of war or pandemics or you name it, but only twice has that World Series not been played, and the first one was in 1903. So let's dive in, and we will figure out what we think is the best World Series of the first decade of the 20th century.
Yep. All right. So 1903, first month, and eventually when we standardize at 7 games, I'll just announce how many games there were, but for now I'll do both of them. 1903, Boston Americans defeat Pittsburgh Pirates 5-3. 1904, no World Series. 1905, New York Giants defeat Philadelphia Athletics 4-1. 1906, Chicago White Sox defeat Chicago Cubs 4-2. 1907, Cubs over Detroit 4-0 with must have been a tie or a suspended game in there. 1908, Cubs over Tigers 4-1. And then in 1909, the Pittsburgh Pirates over the Detroit Tigers 4-3.
So given that it didn't start till 03 and there was no series in 04, we've only got 6 to choose from here. And if you were listening as Andrew was reading off those results, the one thing that maybe comes immediately to mind is the fact that there was no 7-game series. So you're not going to choose a series here that went down to the wire. So I guess I'll
1909 went 7 games.
Did 1909 go 7 games? Yes, it did. You're right. I'm sorry. You're right. So I stand corrected. 1909 did go 7 games. And since we're already on the topic, why don't I just go ahead and tell you what I chose? I, in fact, chose the 1909 World Series where Honus Wagner's Pittsburgh Pirates defeated Ty Cobb's Detroit Tigers in 7 games to win the World Series for the Pittsburgh Pirates.
I went with 1909 as well. It was only 7-game series. The only downside I felt, argument against it was that look, we got to acknowledge that nobody really has seen footage of any of this. So it's hard to do much more than look at box scores and read sort of contemporaneous accounts and things like that. The only knock against the 1909 series, even despite being a 7-game series, was that Game 7 was not a close game. It was an 8-0 win for the Pirates. So the first decisive Game 7 in World Series history, because there was a Game 7 in 1903, but it was a best-of-9 series. The first decisive Game 7 in World Series history was not a close one, but the only one I really considered otherwise was 1903 because it was, 5-3. 1909 also pitted the two biggest stars in baseball at the time in the American League's Ty Cobb and the National League's Honus Wagner. I'll get into the popular anecdote about that not really being true in the series, or not actually having happened. Both had relatively quiet series. Cobb was 6 for 26, so certainly, for in his prime, Ty Cobb in that era was well below his capabilities. Wagner did hit 333, so I guess you can't say he was quiet in the series. He was 8 for 24 with 6 RBIs, so he actually did have a good series. I guess I misspoke when I said he had a quiet series, but that was what I went with as well.
Wagner does have a very good series. The Pirates who had the Pirates who had participated in the very first World Series and lost to the Boston Red Sox in 8 games, largely because they were singing Tessie so damn loud. Pirates could barely play ball because they were singing Tessie so damn loud in Boston. In 1909, the Tigers have been to, this is their 3rd World Series in a row. They've lost the previous 2, both times to the Chicago Cubs. Ty Cobb has lost the only 2 World Series of his career. This one makes it 3 in a row. It's the final World Series in Ty Cobb's career, even though he plays all the way until 1928. So I think that's 19 more seasons, if I'm counting correctly. This is the only World Series victory for Honus Wagner in his entire career. The Pirates, Wagner, I should say, sets. I just want to pull up his stolen bases for the. Wagner steals 6 stolen bases in the 7-game series. That's a record that stands for more than a quarter century. It stands all the way until 1967, when it's broken by Lou Brock in the 1967 World Series. And the Pirates steal 18 bases in the series, which is a record that stands, I think, until sometime in the 90s. It's like the 97 Marlins or something break that record. Don't quote me on that. I have here, it's the first World Series with 4 umpires. It was not traditional for baseball games to have more than 2 umpires in those days, but the sort of like they do today, where they go from 4 to 6 in the postseason, baseball decides to go from 2 to 4 in the World Series. I mentioned the 18 bases for the Pirates. They don't know who's going to be the home team in the 7th game until right before Game 5, when they have a coin toss, which is a new thing for scheduling. Obviously something that doesn't last forever. And the Tigers win that coin toss, but nonetheless are defeated 8-0. And really sort of the pitching star of this series is a guy who's a pitcher who's somebody who a lot of people think should be in the Hall of Fame, and that's a pitcher for the Pittsburgh Pirates, a guy by the name of Babe Adams, who starts 3 games, wins all 3 of them, pitches complete games in all 3 of them, and has an ERA of 1.33 in that series. Babe Adams ends up having a very long career with the Pittsburgh Pirates. He is on the team all the way through until 1926, and in fact plays in another World Series with the Pirates in 1925. He's one of those guys who pitches in a World Series in one decade, the aughts, and then doesn't make it in at all in the 19-teens, but then by 1925, he's still sticking around on that Pirate team to make it to the World Series and actually win the World Series in 25 against the Washington Senators. Babe Adams is a guy who a lot of baseball historians believe should be a member of the Baseball Hall of Fame. And then the only other thing I would mention that I found in my research is that this is the last time that Detroit and Pittsburgh play for a world championship in any major sport until the 2008 Stanley Cup Finals between the Penguins and the Detroit Red Wings.
I had that as well. Yeah. So because you mentioned the coin flip, they did games 1 and 2 in Pittsburgh, games 3 and 4 in Detroit, game 5 in Pittsburgh, game 6 in Detroit, and then I guess had Detroit won the coin flip, so they got game 7. Had Pittsburgh won, they actually would have done like a modern NBA thing of 2-2, 1-1-1. If instead they went 2-2, 1-2. And this, as we get on with these series, this was a thing they tinkered with for a very long time before they finally standardized it. Two other things. One's a general point that I meant to make at the top. Until I think the late 30s, if not into the 40s, the World Series was identified as the World's Series. And, I've read articles about how that just kind of gradually lost favor and became known as the World Series. They dropped the S, but at this time and for several more of these, we're talking about the World's Series. The perhaps most famous story, and it's kind of interesting because it, like anything else involving Ty Cobb, doesn't always stand up to historical accuracy, and also, like a lot of stuff about Ty Cobb, the Ken Burns baseball, which is mostly excellent, but does not do a lot of favors to Ty Cobb. There was a story that Cobb was standing on first base and yelled to Wagner, "I'm coming down there, Krauthead," which is a slur against German people. A pre-World War I anti-German slur, by the way, puts you on the cutting edge. Said he was going to steal second. Not only was thrown out, but that Wagner tagged him in the mouth with the ball, drawing blood from the lip. However, an examination of the play-by-play does not indicate such a play occurred. In the one caught stealing charge to Cobb during the first inning of Game 4, he was actually safe at second due to a throwing error. The story is largely attributed to creative press on the time, and Wagner and Cobb were actually on good terms. So, a lot, there's, not to get off on a tangent, but there's lots of things about Ty Cobb that, stories that have become well-established part of the Ty Cobb villain story. And then it's like, oh yeah, nobody reported on this at the time. And they were reporting on on pretty much everything the guy did at the time. So why was this not reported on? And then there was ones, especially around World Series time, where reporters would just kind of make things up. So evidence that story was actually true. Seems like it wasn't true, but is still a story that gets repeated in a lot of circles about, the two biggest baseball stars, or certainly the two biggest hitters of the first decade of the 20th century.
And that's one of the things that's really sort of great about some of the work that's been done to like restore box scores and play-by-play and everything. So a story like that, you can clearly find out Cobb was not caught stealing at second base other than one time. And there was an error. He was not tagged out on a steal of second base at any point in the whole series. So unless the game recaps are just wrong, there's no way that could be true.
Yeah. So you're right. I think the caught stealing was he reached second. It was just they ruled that he wouldn't have if there hadn't been an error.
Yeah, which obviously precludes the possibility that he was tagged in the mouth with the ball.
Unless he tagged him in the mouth with the ball, and then lost the ball.
Yeah,
but no, it didn't. It obviously didn't happen. Did you have anything else to say on the first generation or the first decade of the World Series, or the World's Series rather, or shall we move on?
One thing I want to do is just real quick, because I do this whenever we do this. Real quick, 1909 Hall of Famers for the Tigers.
Give us a list of all the people who've died in the past year.
Hey, we're speaking of which, in memoriam is getting more and more robust as the weeks go on. So we'll probably start recording that in about a month to 6 weeks here. But that's an aside. Hall of Famers. If you
want to die and make the in memoriam, your time would be now. Sorry, go ahead.
Hall of Famers for the victorious Pirates. We mentioned Wagner, also Fred Clark, outfielder, player manager of the Pirates. Vic Willis is a Hall of Fame pitcher. And then for the Tigers, it's two Hall of Fame outfielders, Ty Cobb and also his teammate Wahoo Sam Crawford from Wahoo, Nebraska. So, yeah, I think we're done with the aughts, and maybe let's move on to the teens.
All right. So this will be 1910 to 1919. And until 1919, these are all best of sevens. So I'll just read those, as that. 1910, Philadelphia Athletics in 5 over the Chicago Cubs. 1911, Philadelphia Athletics in 6 over the New York Giants. 1912, Boston Red Sox in 7 with a tie, so technically in 8 over the New York Giants. 1913, the Philadelphia A's in 5 over the Giants. 1914, the Braves 4-0 over the Athletics. 1915, the Red Sox 4-1 over the Phillies. 1916, the Red Sox 4-1 over the Brooklyn Robins. 1917, the Chicago White Sox 4-2 over the Giants. 1918, the Boston Red Sox 4-2 over the Cubs. And in 1919, the Cincinnati Reds over the Chicago White Sox 5-3 in a best-of-9 series.
And of course, the 1919 World Series is one that was not played on the level, if it were. It was thrown by 8 members of the Chicago White Sox.
I prefer to refer to it as a work.
Where did you go with this one? I've sort of jumped out in front and gave my choice for the first decade. So why don't you do the teens?
I went with 1912, the Red Sox and the Giants. The first, what's considered the first great World Series. In fact, I was surprised that when I was going through this, the 1909 World Series did go 7 games, because I'd read a book about this 1912 World Series being the, sort of the first epic World Series. And while it, dwarfs the 09 series, I just assumed that meant it was also the first 7-game series. There is a ton here with this series. Before we get into that, did you go anywhere else? I would be very surprised if you did.
I did not. I believe the book you read is by Mike Vaccaro, who's a writer for the New York Post. I believe it's the Post. He's sort of a general sports writer these days for New York sports for the New York Post. And the book is called The First Fall Classic, and it really is the first fall classic. I'll let you kind of give your spiel. Let me just a couple things. First of all, in 2020, so over 100 years later, ESPN still ranks this as the 8th best World Series ever played. Hall of Famers for the Giants, it's 2 pitchers, the great Chrissy Mathewson and another guy by the name of Rube Marquard, who got his nickname because everybody said he pitched like Rube Waddell. The number of guys who are in there's one guy in the Hall of Fame named Rube because he was actually a Rube, and that's Rube Waddell. And then there's 2 guys in the Hall of Fame, Rube Marquard and the great Negro League pioneer Rube Foster, who were named that because they pitched like Rube Waddell. So anyway, those are the 2 Hall of Famers for the Giants. Hall of Famers for the Boston Red Sox, 2 outfielders, the great Tris Speaker and Harry Hooper, 2 outfielders. So those are the Hall of Famers. So I got a bunch of stuff here. I did, in fact, choose this one. So why don't you go ahead and I will fill in the gaps.
So this World Series is most famous for Game 8, which was decision Game 7, but a few interesting things happened before this. Game 2 ends up as a 6-6 tie at Fenway Park. This is also the first World Series played at Fenway Park, which is worth mentioning. I believe
the year Park it opened.
Yeah, didn't Fenway Park open the day the Titanic sank?
It was within like 5 days or something like that.
Yeah, so
and let me just say one thing here, and this is really kind of neat. I don't know why I'm even bringing this up, but I'm looking at the baseball reference page for the whole 1912 World Series, and it's funny. I was just looking. I was like, "Is this an error?" Because it's got all the game scores, and then underneath them, the winning and losing pitcher, and then Game 2, it's just blank. And there's just something funny about that to me. But anyway, go ahead.
So let's talk about Game 2 for a minute, which is. The game was called at 6-6 after 11 innings because of darkness. Because this is the era where there's no lights on stadiums. There wouldn't be lights in stadiums, permanent lights for a generation more at least. So they would start the game at 3:00 or whatever, and if it got dark, and they ended the game.
And it was 3:00. And my understanding, I'm not an expert on this, is that that was sort of the typical time to start a ball game in those days. In fact, that's why the Yankees of the 20s were called 5 o'clock Lightning, because right around 5 o'clock, when the game was coming to an end, they would rally, take the lead, win the game, whatever. Starting a game at 3 o'clock is all well and good in the middle of the summer, but when it's 5 o'clock, and especially, and I can state this with, many years of experience throughout my life, 5 o'clock in October in Boston, or 3 o'clock start in October in Boston, you start to get to 6 o'clock. It's getting pretty damn dark.
Well, and we can kind of speak to that because the game was October 9th, and today is October 8th.
Yeah.
So, and that didn't. The one thing I should also point out, though, is it took them to play 11 innings where 12 runs and 21 hits, in addition to 6 errors were recorded. It took them 2 hours and 38 minutes to play that. So I think they were usually done by about 5:15, even in World Series games. So the game ends in a tie. And what is interesting about this is that, and it's funny how even, here we are talking 7 years before the 1919 World Series, we're talking about, players and potential chicanery. The way it was done then was that the players on both teams were cut into the World Series gates for the first 4 games. And the reason for that, if you think about it, was because if you cut them into however many World Series gates there would be, you're now encouraging them to want to play more games.
And I'm not sure, but I'm pretty sure that there's an element of that. It still persists to this day. That
it probably does.
First 4, it goes into whether it's the World Series bonus or whatever it is.
Yeah. Now, again, when you talk about now in the World Series money, for anybody who's not, especially in baseball, it's like the 50 grand difference or whatever it is when you make $10 million a year or more. But back then it was, so basically it was, you got cut in for the gates in games 1, 2, 3, and 4, because those games are going to be played no matter what, whether it was a sweep or not. And then after that, the owners kept all of it. Considering game 2 went to a draw, basically, a time limit draw, if you will, the players were under the impression, well, we're going to get cut in on the first 5 games now, because the first 5, there's going to be at least 5 games in this series, no matter what happens. And the owners, who had decided that they had extended their largesse enough already, decided, no, you won't. You're still only getting cuts of the first 4 games, and we will just take the rest of it for ourselves in games 5, 6, 7, and 8, in addition to the already substantial cut they got for the first 4 games.
Yeah.
It's not like that was an even money proposition either. So that was sort of what made game 2 notable. The Red Sox had won game 1. I'm not going to go through every game, but just to give you and you may have gaps to fill in, which I'll let you do. But the first game was a 4-3 game. Second game was the tie. Third game was 2-1. So they played 3 games. They've scored the exact same number of runs. It's 1-1 in the series in 3 full games. Red Sox win games 4 and 5, 3-1, 2-1. Giants win game 6, 5-2. Game 7 with Smokey Joe Wood on the mound is one of those that still gets sort of whispered about, because Smokey Joe Wood was apparently one of the ones who was most hot about this whole not getting paid thing.
Mm-hmm.
And there's been, I don't think anything's ever been conclusively proven or even linked really, but there's been some sort of speculation that maybe he purposely did not have his best stuff in this game, as the Giants won 11-4 and forced this game 8, which we'll talk about in a second.
So, yeah, let's start with Wood. Wood is pitching incredibly in this series. Smokey Joe Wood in 1912 has one of the great seasons in American baseball history. Now, you should keep in mind that this is an era for pitchers, but Smokey Joe Wood in 1912, 34-5, leads the league in wins. I think even then it goes without saying that 34 wins is going to lead the league. 1.91 ERA with 10 shutouts and 35 complete games, both of which lead all of baseball. So that is considered one of the great single season pitching seasons of all time. Smokey Joe Wood in 1912 is well on his way to being an all-time great, and then he has arm troubles and ends up actually finishing his career as an outfielder with the Cleveland Indians. So Smokey Joe Wood is the winning pitcher in game number 1. He pitches a complete game, 4-3 victory. In game 3, they bring no, I'm sorry. So in game 4, they bring Wood back, and he once again pitches a complete game victory, this time 3-1. So he's pitched incredibly in 2 games in a row, and you're right. And then he comes in game number 7, which is actually only the 6th game that's going to be decided, and his pitching line there is 1 inning, 7 hits, 6 earned runs. So completely at odds with what he had done previously, not to mention what he had done throughout the entire season. The other thing that I should mention, and if you're looking to go to an old episode, check out the episode we did about a year ago with an author by the name of Dan Taylor called Baseball at the Abyss, which tells the story of the 1927 season in baseball, 1926 and 27, half about Babe Ruth and then half about this gambling scandal, potential game throwing scandal with Ty Cobb and Tris Speaker involved. And I won't go into the whole sort of history of that whole thing, but one of the guys who has sort of an interview that's been buried for decades before it comes out about this whole thing is Smokey Joe Wood. So Smokey Joe Wood is somebody who history has sort of found was involved in some of these game fixing, gambling type of things. So it is very, very possible that he was involved in this type of thing based on that evidence. A couple other things I just want to note. Game 3 is actually ended when an outfielder by the name of Josh DeVore for the Giants makes a barehanded catch on a line drive in the outfield to end the game. So a crazy game there, a 2-1 Giants victory. We talked about game 7 potentially being thrown. The teams are going back and forth despite the fact that the games are in differing cities. There's not a single 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Okay, there's a day off between game 5 and game 6. Game 5 is in Boston, game 6 is in New York. But by and large,
that was probably because it was a Sunday.
Oh, and I think you might be right about that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So they're basically going back and forth between Boston and New York City every single day and playing a new game every day. I wonder if that also contributed in some way to why they maybe called game 2 a little bit early. And then the other thing I would mention before we talk about game 8 is that the attendance for game 8 was not good. It was about half full, and that's for 2 reasons. First of all, some of these game-fixing rumors about the previous game are already starting to come out. And then second of all, the Royal Rooters, who were these great Boston fans, were angry that when they had gotten to their seats in Game 7, those seats had been given to another group of fans, and so they decided they're going to boycott Game 8. So this classic Game 8 of this classic 1912 World Series is played in front of a Fenway Park that's only about half full.
So the guy we have not really mentioned yet on the other side is Christy Mathewson, who in this series goes 0-2 despite pitching to a 0.94 ERA. So it's Christy Mathewson against Smokey Joe Wood. Christy Mathewson, who's still he's been one of the best pitchers in baseball for a while now, and he's probably getting towards the end of his peak era. He'd be 32 here, which, with how much he pitched and the time obviously at the time we didn't know he was only going to be alive for 13 more years, but probably just getting to the, he's still Christy Mathewson. And so they put up pretty much matching zeros for a while. The Giants get ahead 1-0 in the third. It's tied up at 1 in the bottom of the 7th. And we have not only a game 8, but we have extra innings. And I don't know if you have big plays you want to fill in the middle of this, but that was the first 9 innings of this game was a 1-1 tie.
I don't have anything on the first 9 innings, but like you said, it's tied at 1 after nine innings.
So I guess Wood didn't start. Wood came in relief.
Correct.
Right. Okay. So you go into the 10th inning, and it's Smokey Joe Wood on the mound. Leadoff man doubles, or excuse me, in the top of the 10th, Murray doubles with 1 out and scores on an RBI single from Fred Merkle. And this is far afield from this, but for a moment, it looked like Fred Merkle. And I know people didn't necessarily look at this stuff through the eyes that like the media would cover it now, but talk about a possible redemption story for Fred Merkle, who was in such a hurry that he gave away the pennant in 1908, which by the way was a joke that the umpires let that happen. Anyway, I digress. Nothing like digressing from a game about 1912 to talk about one even older. So the Giants take a 2-1 lead. So they're 3 outs away from winning it. They go into the bottom of the 10th. Clyde Engel comes up to pinch hit for Wood. He lofts an easy fly ball to Fred Snodgrass in center field, and Snodgrass drops it. And Engel, by the end of the play, Engel standing on second base. The next day's New York Times described it, and now the ball settles. It is full and fair and in the pouch in the pouch of the padded glove of Snodgrass, but he is too eager to toss it to Murray, and it dribbles to the ground.
And he actually, I believe the story is that in the very next play, he made like an amazing catch, but nobody talks about that.
Yeah, and obviously there's no video to know, how nice a catch it was, but he makes the catch. Engel goes to third on the catch, so it's two outs, a man on third base. Giants still with a 2-1 lead. They walk the next guy. I guess it says inexplicably walked, but that makes it seem like it was an intentional walk. I guess Mathewson just was probably tiring and lost him. So the winning run is on base. Up comes Tris Speaker. He pops one up into foul territory, and it drops between Mathewson and Merkle and the catcher. So the first baseman, the catcher, and the pitcher all converge on it, but it drops. And then after it fell to the ground, and a couple of pitches later, Speaker singles it, hits a single, ties the game. An intentional walk to load the bases, and then Larry Gardner flied the ball deep to right field, and it scored a run on a sac fly to win the game.
And that is the classic 1912 World Series. It's funny because even though people think about the sort of John McGraw New York Giants as the team of the first 20 years of the 20th century, they only win one World Series. Their only World Series win is that second ever one in 1905. They lose in 1911, 1912, 1917. So throughout the teens, especially, they're losing
too. They lost 3 straight, 11, 12, and 13.
Oh, they did lose in 13. Okay, so they lost to the A's in 11 and 13, and then to Boston in 12. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, McGraw, sort of like Earl Weaver, who's kind of got a lot of similarities in height and, kind of like a little angry guy. Kind of like Earl Weaver only ever won one of the World Series that he managed. John McGraw loses, 4 World Series out of his first 5. Then he wins a couple in the early 20s. But yeah, it's not the Giants get beaten a lot more in those first 20 years in the World Series than they win.
All right. You want to move on to the 20s?
Yeah, let's talk about the 20s.
All right. 1920. And the first 2 of these are 8-game series. So 1920, Cleveland Indians 5-2 over the Brooklyn Robins. 1921, New York Giants 5-3 over the Yankees. 22, the Giants 4-0 with one tie over the Yankees. 23, Yankees over Giants 4-2. 24, Senators over Giants in 7. 25, Pirates over Senators in 7. 26, Cardinals over Yankees in 7. 27, Yankees over Pirates in 4. 28, Yankees over Cardinals in 4. And 29, A's over Cubs in 4. So, or excuse me, A's over Cubs in 5. So you have 3 7-game series back to back to back, 24, 25, 26.
So this is obviously the time, just as you hear, that the Yankees were starting to dominate. They were in 6 World Series. They won 3 of them. I actually, though, did not go with a Yankee World Series. I went with 1924 here.
I did as well. I looked at all 3 of these. 25, I kind of not dismissed right away, but kind of took a back seat. And then I really looked at 24 and 26. And I guess I thought in my head I would end up going with 26, but I think the more I looked into it, I landed on this as well, the Senators and the Giants in 1924.
So this is an interesting World Series also. I mean, it's an interesting World Series for a lot of reasons, but one of the things that's that this kind of demonstrates as I read my list of Hall of Famers, there were a lot in the 60s, 50s and 60s, Ted Williams and some other people, Frankie Frisch on the Veterans Committee of the Hall of Fame kind of let in a number of players with dubious Hall of Fame pedigrees, which you'll see that because here are the Hall of Famers for the New York Giants in this World Series. Frankie Frisch, Travis Jackson, George Kelly, Freddie Lindstrom, and Bill Terry. That's 5 guys, 5 infielders who are all future Hall of Famers on those Giants teams. And for good measure, add Hack Wilson and Ross Youngs. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 7 future Hall of Famers appear as position players for the New York Giants in this World Series, some more deserving than others. It's a paltry 4 for the Senators. Walter Johnson, the great pitcher, Bucky Harrison, the young man who's the player manager as a second baseman, and then 2 future Hall of Famers in the outfield, Goose Goslin and Sam Rice. We're hoping to do an episode, potentially even with a guest co-host in a couple weeks on this 1924 World Series. It's one of the great ones of all time. It ends on a game-winning hit. It's exactly 100 years ago this year. It's the last baseball title for the city of Washington, D.C. until the Nationals in 2019, 95 years later. Trying to think if there's anything sort of other big picture are on the game. But yeah, it is the Game 7 is one of the greatest Game 7s in World Series history. And it is it's an epic World Series.
Yeah, and you kind of have to look at the Senators, since they came in 1901, were perennially a second division team, meaning 5th, 6th, 7th, or 8th, and it usually wasn't 5th. They had a couple of good years in the mid to late teens where they finished in second a couple of times, where they were still way far back of first. And then, the immediate preceding years, 1920, they finished in 6th. 21, they were in 4th. 22, they were in 6th. And the year before this, in 23, they were 75 and 78 and finished in 4th. So they were still, not a team that was contending, especially after the Yankees had won the pennant for 3 straight years. And this was sort of as out of nowhere as you would see back then. Walter Johnson for a long time was the guy who was the really good pitcher on the really bad team. And, late in his career, he finally gets to a World Series, and it's a classic against a team that the Giants is their 4th straight World Series as well. Precedented for anybody who's not named the Yankees.
Johnson had essentially decided that he was going to retire after the 1924 season. He was tired of all the losing. He ends up pitching, I think, 4 more seasons Yeah, he pitches through 27. In fact, his last ever major league game is the same game where Babe Ruth hits his 60th home run in 1927. But yeah, he had decided he was going to retire. The old historical saying about George Washington was um, first in war, first in peace, and first in the hearts of his countrymen. And so then the joke was about the Senators. Washington, first in war, first in peace, and last in the American League. But in 1924, like you said, they do make it to the World Series. The Giants beat the Nationals, which they're kind of interchangeably known as the Nationals and Senators at this point, which is its own whole other thing. But the Giants win the first game in 12 innings when they score 2 runs off of Walter Johnson, and Johnson takes the loss. In game 2, Roger Peckinpah hits the game-winning double for Washington in the bottom of the 9th after the Senators had blown a 3-1 lead, and so that makes it 4-3. Giants come back and win game 3. Washington comes back and wins game 4. Giants win game 5. Johnson is again the losing pitcher in game 5. I'm looking here. I think, does Johnson pitch game 3 also? Let me check on that. He is no, he is not the starting pitcher in game 5. So he starts game 1, he starts game 5, he loses them both. But then in game 6, and I think he might even start. What games does he start here? Does he only start 2 games, Johnson? Give me a second here to look at this here. No, yeah, he only starts 2 games, but he loses them both game 1 and game 5. So Walter Johnson loses both games, World Series games that he pitches. Everybody thinks he's going to be the retire, having never won a World Series game. But the Nationals/Senators managed to win 3 of their other 4 games that Johnson is not starting. They go into game 7. Game is in Washington at Griffith Stadium. They start a guy by the name of Curly Ogden, who has never pitched before in the World Series and will never pitch again. They bring him in. It was almost kind of like what they used to do in the old days, or I'm sorry, what they would do now, I should say. Ogden, and I want to just make sure I get this right. Ogden is a right-handed pitcher, and so Bucky Harris, the player manager of the Senators, starts Ogden, hoping that John McGraw, who was maybe the father of platooning in Major League Baseball, he hopes that McGraw is going to start his left-handed batters, and then after one batter, he brings in the guy who was his intended starter all along, a guy by the name of George Mugridge. The game is it's back and forth. The Giants have a 3-1 lead going into the bottom of the 8th inning, and then Bucky Harris hits a bad hop ground ball that hits a pebble and bounces into the outfield, scoring 2 runs. Johnson comes in to start pitching in the 9th. This game goes to 12 innings. It's the longest game 7 by innings in World Series history. There's never been a 12-inning game 7, even to this day. Johnson comes in relief. Walter Johnson, having just pitched a couple of days earlier, pitches 3 innings. He gives up 3 hits, but no runs, strikes out 5 batters. And then in the bottom of the 12th inning, first batter grounds out. There's an error on the catcher in the next at bat, and Muddy Rule, who is the Senators catcher, who's at bat. This was a drop ball. Okay. So Muddy Rule hits a foul ball. He's the catcher. He's a very slow man. He hits a foul ball. The catcher drops it. On the next,
you know why the catcher dropped it?
Oh, he trips on his mask, right?
He trips on his own discarded mask. Yes.
trips on his mask, and then Muddy Rule with more life doubles to left field. So he's on second base. Walter Johnson comes up, reaches on an error on the shortstop. Rule does not even try to advance. So then there's runners on first and second, and then a Senators batter by the name of Earl McNeely, who I believe is the third baseman. Let me verify that. Earl McNeely, no, he's a center fielder. I'm sorry. Hits another ground ball that bounces off everybody says it bounces off the same pebble as the hit from a couple of innings ago. Muddy Rule, who's the catcher, who a lot of people say is one of the slowest guys in all of baseball, comes all the way around from second base to score, and the Senators win the first and only World Series in their entire history as the Washington Senators.
And interestingly enough, this would be the last extra innings Game 7 until 1991.
Mm-hmm.
Same franchise involved, just a move.
And it's funny you mentioned that because, and we've touched on this before in the past, but in DC, they take credit for a lot of, they take credit for what the Expos did. They take credit for what both the Senators teams done, and most of these teams haven't done anything. We were in Minnesota a couple months ago and went to a game, and in Minnesota, where the Twins play at Target Field, they have a banner for the 1924 Senators World Championship team. So two teams, the Nationals and the Twins, have World Championship banners for the 1924 Washington Senators. I thought that was kind of funny.
And I think they both have equal claim to it. I honestly think the reason people would say, like, you're not surprised when the San Francisco Giants or the Los Angeles Dodgers do it, right? Is the only reason people are surprised, is because they changed the name.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So, but on the same token, Washington has a claim to it as well. So, I got no problem with, I'm actually glad Minnesota does it. I'm not expecting them to constantly, and I mean, anybody who played on that team is long dead. I'm not expecting them to constantly honor that, but I like that they at least acknowledge that, yeah, we have this franchise was somewhere else, and just because we change the name, Minnesota Senators would have been an interesting name anyway. But I like that they do that.
Yeah, I don't disagree. Should we move? Like I said, we're hoping to do another episode on this 24 World Series Senators team over the next month or so. Should we move on to the 30s?
Yes. And for the 30s, as we start to get into this, one of the issues in the 30s specifically is that none of the Yankees series were particularly good.
Yeah.
And the Yankees were in a lot of them. So starting in 1930, and now we're finally into all 7-game series, so I don't have to say anything else. Philadelphia A's over St. Louis Cardinals in 6. St. Louis Cardinals over Philadelphia A's in 7 in 1931. 1932, Yankees over Cubs in 4. 1933, Giants over Senators in 5. 1934, Cardinals over Tigers in 7. 1935, Tigers over Cubs in 6. 1936, Yankees over Giants in 6. 1937, Yankees over Giants in 5. 1938, Yankees over Cubs in 4. And 1939, Yankees over Reds in 4. So I think you kind of are choosing between two here, but I'll let you, weigh in here.
I think it's actually your turn.
I went with 1934. I went with the Cardinals over the Tigers. I looked at the A's over the Athletics. I think 34, just maybe a little more of the star.
The A's
power.
over the Cardinals, you mean?
Yeah, sorry, the A's over the Cardinals. I went with 1934. I think just sort of the balance of the games was a little bit closer. 1-run game in game 2. Game 5 was a 2-run game, 1-run game in game 6, and then game 7 was not particularly close. I had a tough time choosing between these teams. 1934 was kind of the Dizzy Dean series. He was 2-1 with a 1.73 ERA. Lots of Hall of Famers specifically for this Cardinal team, but also 4 different guys from the Tigers as well. So are we continuing our agreement, or did we separate on this one?
We are continuing our agreement. The Tigers of the mid-30s are a really, really good team. They're led by their future Hall of Fame manager, a player manager named Mickey Cochran, who had come over after being the star catcher for the A's teams that made 3 World Series from 29 to 31. They win it this year, they lose it this year, and then they win it the following year against the Chicago Cubs in 1935. Hall of Famers, in addition to Cochran, these 3 guys, all future Hall of Famers. Keep in mind, this was the time of Al Capone and the FBI and all those type of things, the G-Men. So these 3 guys were collectively known as the G-Men, and that was a guy I just mentioned a minute ago with the Senators, now with the Tigers, is future Hall of Famer Goose Goslin. Also, second baseman Charlie Gehringer and first baseman Hank Greenberg. The Cardinals have 5 future Hall of Famers, including Dizzy Dean, who had been a 30-game winner. I think that's the last 30-game winner in National League history is Dizzy Dean in 1934. I can double check that, but I'm pretty sure that's the last 30-game winner in National League history is Dizzy Dean in 34. Also, the aforementioned Frankie Frisch, now with the Cardinals, outfielder Joe Medwick, a future Hall of Famer, and then 2 sort of journeyman Hall of Fame pitchers, both kind of at the end of their career, in Jesse Haynes and Dazzy Vance. Really good game. The best game of the series is probably Game 2, which is a 12-inning victory for the Tigers. The Tigers win game 2 in the bottom of the 12th when all 4 Hall of Famers bat back to back to back to back. Cochran grounds out, Gehringer walks, Greenberg walks, and then Goslin singles to center field, scoring Gehringer. How often do you see that? 4 guys in a row in a World Series game contributing to the deciding inning to win the game. Other exciting things I just sort of noted from this series. Game 6 is a Cardinal victory, 4-3. It is won by the Cardinals. The game-winning hit takes place, or the go-ahead run takes place in the 7th inning. The hit is actually by Paul Dean, Dizzy Dean's brother, who some people refer to him sometime as Daffy Dean, because Dizzy Dean was sort of a character. He put on a shtick all the time. His brother was sort of just a quiet, easygoing guy, but Dizzy, being a great marketer, decided that, well, if you're going to call me Dizzy, let's also call my brother Daffy. Each of them win 2 games in this 1934 World Series, and Paul Daffy Dean contributes the go-ahead RBI in the top of the 7th inning. Only other thing that's interesting in this game is that Joe Medwick, who is having a great World Series for the Cardinals, is in game number 7. Let me see. I actually have from an old book here. Let me see if I can just pull up the description. In the 6th inning, with the Cardinals ahead 9-0, Medwick belted a triple and slid hard into Marv Owen, who was covering third. The 2 men tangled. When Medwick ran out to his position in left field, he was greeted with a bombardment of rolled-up newspapers and garbage and bottles from the angry fans. He walked away, and the Commissioner Landis, who is sitting right in the very front row, right next to the field, orders Medwick taken out of the game for his own safety, and so that the game can be completed. We've talked about, and Frankie Frisch, who's the player manager, says to Landis, "Why should I take him out? Suppose it costs me the game." Landis said, "Your team is winning 9-0. If you can lose this one, your team needs a new manager." And so one of the other things, and I don't know if
go ahead.
I don't know if this is true. This was in the Ken Burns. Were you going to say that? What?
Yeah, who cares? This is one where nobody gets slandered. So who cares if it's true or not?
It's a funny. Why don't you say it?
So basically, weren't they throwing like eggs and stuff at him?
Yeah, that's
He said, "I can understand why they were throwing that stuff at me. I couldn't understand why they brought it to the park in the first place."
Yeah, that's one of those that you hope is true, because like you said, it doesn't slander anybody. It's just, it would be funny if he said it. So
yeah, okay. Yeah, that's one of those where I'm like, If he never said that, who cares? Somebody said it. It's funny. So attribute it to him. Why not attribute it to him?
The Casey Stengel principle.
Exactly.
All right. Do we want to move on to the 1940s?
Yes, let's move on to the 1940s. Certainly a carefree time for everyone. So we'll start. We're going to have a lot of Giants Dodgers series to discuss here in the 1940s, but let's. I lost my thing.
You mean Yankees Dodgers?
Yes, we'll have a lot of those too. All right, 1940, Cincinnati 4-3 over the Tigers. 41, Yankees 4-1 over the Dodgers. 42, Cardinals 4-1 over the Yankees. 43, Yankees 4-1 over the Cardinals. 44, Cardinals 4-2 over the Browns. 45, Tigers 4-3 over the Cubs. 46, Cardinals 4-3 over the Red Sox. 47, Yankees 4-3 over the Dodgers. 48, Indians 4-2 over the Boston Braves. And 1949, the Yankees 4-1 over the Brooklyn Dodgers. So how many 7-game series we have there? 45, 46, 47, kind of like the 20s. We have 3 right in a row there. And Bucky Harris is involved as the manager in one of them, kind of like the 20s.
So I was tempted by 46, which is the famous the only World Series that Ted Williams ever participates in. He bats 200. Enos Slaughter, future Hall of Famer, scores from first base for the Cardinals to win it in Game 7. That's one of the first really well-known uses of the shift by the Cardinals in 46 against Ted Williams. But I couldn't help but go but 1947. It is considered one of the great World Series of all time. We did a whole episode on it a couple years ago, so I'd be curious to hear yours, but I went with 47.
I did the same thing. I looked at the 3 of them that went 7 games, and I was inclined. Was I maybe thinking about not trying to overcompensate a little and not just go with Yankees Dodgers, but you look at 47 and just to go with the scores real quick: 5-3, 10-3, 9-8, 3-2, 2-1. So there's 3 straight 1-run games in a row, then an 8-6 game, and then a 5-2 game 7. So you don't have a classic 14-inning game, but you really have one game that was a blowout, and then a bunch of 1-run and 2-run and 3-run games. So, from a competitiveness standpoint, before we even get into star power and obviously being the first World Series after the color barrier was broken, just in terms of the closeness of the matchup, 47 is tough to beat.
We did a whole episode on this almost exactly 2 years ago. And one of the things that it might be my favorite episode that we ever did, other than my favorite episode is probably, and I'm bummed that Andrew had to miss this, but my favorite episode just from a personal point of view is when I got to interview Bill Curry of the 60s Packers. That was, probably, my favorite episode ever to do. But as far as just that I'm like just walking the dog or whatever, and I just want something to listen to, that's kind of the one I go back to over and over and over again. I just enjoyed it so much. It's also kind of famous.
That, for the record, was the famous one where I thought we were doing the whole year of 1947, which has spawned all kinds of jokes over the years. But I had prepared to talk about lots of different things in 1947, and it turned out not only were we just talking about baseball, we were just talking about the World Series.
It is the first World Series ever televised. It is the first World Series ever to feature a pinch hit home run, that by the great Yogi Berra. It is really sort of the first of the of the Yankee Dodger World Series. They played in 41, but it was really kind of different casts of characters, especially for Brooklyn. 47, it's a lot of the same guys that you'd see in 49 and 52 and 53 and even into 55 and 56. And of course, obviously, it's also the first World Series ever to feature an African-American player. Actually, 2 black players in this World Series: Jackie Robinson, who plays every game, and then a pitcher by the name of Dan Bankhead, who actually gets in a game in 47, but actually is a pinch runner. He doesn't pitch, but he comes in as a pinch runner. Hall of Famers in this one for the Dodgers. Roy Campanella is not there yet, but it's mostly the boys of summer that you would expect. Gil Hodges, Pee Wee Reese, Jackie Robinson, of course, and Duke Snider, although Snider, I believe, doesn't actually get into a game, but he's on the roster. And then a Hall of Fame shortstop by the name of Archie Vaughn is sort of a utility man, backup shortstop, and gets in a couple games for the Dodgers. And for the Yankees, it's the three Italians. It's Yogi Berra, Phil Rizzuto, and Joe DiMaggio are the future Hall of Famers for them. Like I said, we did do a whole episode on this series. I don't know. I can run through a couple of highlights real quick just to kind of give an overview, unless you'd rather.
No, certainly. I mean, we should talk about Game 4 specifically, but whatever you have to go over, I think is good to cover.
So Game 3, the Dodgers jump out to a 6-0 lead in the bottom of the second, but almost blow the game. They make it all the way to 9-8. The Yankees on that pinch hit home run by Yogi Berra in the top of the seventh make it 9-8, but then they bring in, and that home run by Berra is actually off of Ralph Branca, who would give up a much more famous home run to another New York baseball team in 4 years. But then they bring in the great Dodger reliever Hugh Casey, who doesn't get everybody out, but for all, I think he only gives up one base runner the entire time he's in the game in the 2 2/3 innings that he pitches. So Dodgers escape with that game. A sports writer by the name of Dick Young going into Game 4 actually calls this the worst World Series that he's ever seen, but there are some exciting things to come. Not that a 9-8 game shouldn't be considered exciting in and of itself. Game 4, Yankee pitcher by the name of Bill Bevins, who is a mediocre pitcher and also somebody who lacks control, nonetheless manages to go 8 2/3 innings without giving up a single hit. This is 9 innings before Don Larson. And
9 years.
9 years. What did I say? 9 days?
9 innings.
9 innings. No, that would be silly. But yet, nonetheless, based on walks and 10 walks and a Yankee error, the Dodgers actually are able to push across a run. So they go into the bottom of the ninth, down 2-1. Bevin gets the first out, but then walks Carl Furillo. Then there's a pop fly. They send up a pinch hitter who, and then the pinch runner who for Furillo is a guy by the name of Al Gianfrido, who we'll talk about in a minute. They then decide they're going to walk Pete Reeser, who had been pinch hitting for the pitcher. There's runners on first and second. They send up Cookie Lavagetto to pinch hit for Eddie Stanky, the second baseman. Bevins doubles to right field over the head of Tommy Henrich. Both runners score. There's the famous call by Red Barber that says, "Here comes the tying run, and here comes the winning run." And the Dodgers tie the series at 2-2. Bevins loses his no-hit bid. Gianfrido will only participate in one more game in his major league career, and that's the following day when the Yankees are in the ninth inning once again, up 2-1, and they once again bring in Lavagetto to pinch hit for Hugh Casey, the pitcher. But in this instance, he strikes out with to end the game, and the Yankees go up 3-2. Brooklyn comes back and ties the series in Game 6, and then in Game 7, the Yankees pull it out 5-2. And the star of the series is a relief pitcher for the Yankees by the name of Joe Page, who in Game 7 gets the win, 5 innings pitched, no walks, and only a single hit. A great classic World Series between the Dodgers and the Yankees. I want to check here. So the Yankees are up 2-0, but then Brooklyn wins 2 at Ebbets Field. The Yankees win Game 5. Brooklyn wins Game 6 at Yankee Stadium, and the Yankees close out Game 7. So like I said, we did a whole episode on this series. I loved the whole episode. It's a great episode, if we do say so ourselves, but definitely both for historic reasons and just on the field excitement. I think it deserves our vote for 1947.
Yep. And that game 6 was also when Gianfrido made that catch and DiMaggio kicked the dirt, and the famous image of DiMaggio, like the only time he showed emotion on the baseball field, and
yeah, and then
joining the pantheon of times he showed plenty of anger off the field, but that was the only time he showed it on the field.
That's a good point too. And I think some sports writer jokes that the unhappiest person in the world is a sports writer whose typewriter doesn't have a G between DiMaggio, Gianfrido, and Lavagetto. But anyway,
or an O.
Yeah, that's a good point.
All right, so that was the 40s. Shall we move on to the 1950s?
Yes.
All right, 1950s. I keep accidentally closing this out, and that's my fault, but World Series. I mean, I could do the teams. I couldn't do the games. All right. 50, Yankees over Phillies 4-0. 51, Yankees over Giants 4-2. 52, Yankees over Dodgers 4-3. 53, Yankees over Dodgers 4-2. 54, force of habit. 54, Giants over Indians 4-0. 55, Dodgers over Yankees 4-3. 56, Yankees over Dodgers 4-3. 57, Braves over Yankees 4-3. 58, Yankees over Braves 4-3. And then 59, Dodgers over White Sox 4-2. So you have game 7s here in 52, 55, 56, 57, 58.
Yep. And I was very much this was like the last one that really this one took me some time. Actually, this one and the next one really kind of took me some time. So I'm a little bit glad it's your turn. Why don't you tell me where you went?
So I went with 55. I could make a case for a few of them. I mean, 56 with Larson throwing a perfect game certainly gets involved, and then 52 with the stretch of the Yankees and Dodgers playing all those years in a row, and those early 50s Dodger teams, 52, 53, supposedly, maybe actually being a better team than the Yankees. But, we're talking best. So we're also talking narrative. We're talking, moments and things like that. And the Dodgers finally, after having lost enough times to the Yankees where you started to actually believe it was never going to happen, winning it. On top of that, you get a few different close games. Game 1 is a 1-run game. Game 5 is a 2-run game. Game 7 is a 2-run game. You have the famous play with Yogi Berra and Jackie Robinson, where, to his dying day, Yogi Berra insisted that Jackie Robinson was out. That was game 1, I believe it was, with the steal of the plate.
Yeah.
I went with that. But I could certainly be taught, I understand there's going to be a case for a couple other series in this one.
So I actually went with 53. Let's just run through the Hall of Famers for both. And we're I'm sorry, I went with 52, not 53. 52.
I was going to say 53 was only a 6-game series. I mean, you don't have to go with a 7-game series, but go ahead. Sorry.
52. And one thing I'm seeing under 55, this is the first World Series televised in color. I don't think any of that footage doesn't survive. It would be cool if it did, but it doesn't. Hall of Famers in 55. For the Yankees, it's Berra, Ford, Mantle, and Rizzuto. For the Dodgers, Campanella, Hodges, Reese, Robinson, and Duke Snider. And then actually Sandy Koufax, who's on the World Series roster but doesn't get into any games. In 52, it is the same guys for the Dodgers, and for the Yankees, Whitey Ford is still doing military service, so he's not there, but it's Johnny Mize is sometime first baseman and pinch hitter for the Dodgers in 52, or for the Yankees rather in 52. So I like your argument for for 55. I do think it's also taken on a lot of historical importance because the Dodgers only had 2 years left to play in Brooklyn, and that, you know, it was an epic game 7 where Yogi Berra comes up with runners on base and they shift all the way around to the right for Berra to pull the ball. He hits it instead to the opposite field, and the rookie outfielder from Latin America by the name of Sandy Amoros runs and makes a running catch right by the foul line to rob Yogi Berra of what likely would have been an extra base hit. So I think I'd be willing to give on that. Just to sort of give my argument a little bit for 52. There's 2 run games in that series, and there's 3 2-run games in that inning. There's an 11-inning game in Game 5 with Duke Snyder hitting a go-ahead double in the top of the 11th, and Carl Erskine, who's a guy who died this year, and we'll talk about it in memoriam, he pitches all 11. He retires the last 19 Yankees, including Mickey Mantle, Johnny Mize, and Yogi Berra to end the game. So sort of like the Tigers doing it in 34 to win a game, the Dodgers, the Yankees do not do it, and Erskine retires 3 Hall of Famers in a row to end the game. Game 6 is Mantle's first World Series home run, and then Game 7 is an epic catch by Billy Martin on a pop-up by Jackie Robinson that gets lost sort of in the infield in the sun, and I want to read something to you about that in a second. But I can go with 55. I think it was probably my second choice.
Yeah, I think they're both pretty close. But I just happened to come down on the side of 55. But I think it's pretty easy to argue one way or another.
And so let me just, even though this is we decided to go with 55. I just want to read something about the Billy Martin catch off of Jackie Robinson in 1952, and just forgive me for a second here. I was on the wrong year. So this is Game 7 at Ebbets Field. Yankees had won it in Game 6 to make it a 3-3 game, and this is in the bottom of the 7th inning. Bases are loaded. Pee Wee Reese, Billy Cox, and Carl Furillo are on base. Jackie Robinson comes up and he hits this sort of big and the Dodgers are down 4-2, and Jackie Robinson hits this pop fly, and there's 2 outs. So had it fallen, probably 2 and potentially 3 runs would have scored. And Billy Martin makes this running catch to make the catch at the very last second. And I should note that part of the reason that Jackie Robinson and Casey Stengel didn't like each other was that Robinson was critical of the Yankees for not integrating quickly enough. So there is sort of a more serious issue behind a little bit of this. But here's how Casey Stengel describes this play. He says, "When Robinson hits that pop fly in the 7th, who makes the catch? My feller at first is asleep, and my feller behind the bat," which I assume he means the catcher, "I don't know what he's doing. But that little 140-pound fresh kid on second comes tearing in after the ball. It isn't his ball, but that 135-pound kid races in, and I can't swallow because my heart is in my throat. If that 130-pound kid don't make the catch, we blow the World Series. He makes it." Oh, and I think somewhere he calls Robinson that the man who never shuts his mouth or something like that. So anyway, we went with 55, but there's good stories for some of the other years as well. Here we go. He goes, "Them Brooklyns is tough in this little park, but I knew we would win today. My men play good ball on the road. Now you are going to ask me why I left in the left-hand fella to face the right-hand fella who makes speeches with bases full. Don't I know percentages and etc.? The reason I left him in is the other man has not seen hard-throwing left-handed pitchers much and could have trouble with the break of a left-handed hard curve, which is what happens. So there you go. That's Stengel on 50 on the 52 World Series.
He had a way of explaining himself.
All right, we're on to the 60s now, right?
Let's go to the 60s. So I'll read these off here. 1960, Pirates over Yankees 4-3. 1961, Yankees over Reds in 5. 1962, Yankees over Giants in 7. 1963, Dodgers over Yankees in 4. 1964, Cardinals over Yankees in 7. Say goodbye to the Yankees for a little while. 1965, Dodgers over Twins in 7. 1966, Orioles over Dodgers in 4. 1967, Cardinals over Red Sox in 7. 1968, Tigers over Cardinals in 7. And 1969, Mets over Orioles in 5. So 7-game series in 60, 62, 64, 65, 67, and 68.
Yeah, this was a tough one because I feel like, first of all, a lot of the series have a different character. And so it really depended on which direction you wanted to go in. I actually went with 1964, the Yankees and the Cardinals. Okay. But I'd be curious to hear where you went.
I went with 62, actually. Okay. The Yankees over the Giants, the last Yankees World Championship for quite a while. You look Game 7, a 1-0 game that ends on, just a very different way for a game to end, with a fielding play, right? Was that Game 7 to the Bobby Richardson play?
Willie McCovey hits a line drive right at Bobby Richardson. And this is a line drive off of Ralph Terry, who had given up the home run 2 years earlier to Bill Mazeroski. And if Richardson isn't right there to catch the ball, 2 runs score, and the Ralph Terry is the GOAT of yet another World Series. Yeah, this is a good game. The other interesting thing about this series is it takes almost 2 weeks to play this series. The first game is on October 4th, and then the 7th game is not till October 16th. And that's because there's a 5-day rain delay from October 10th all the way to October 15th. With all sorts of rain in San Francisco. But yeah, this is a pretty good series. You got scores like 2-0, 3-2, 5-3, 1-0. These are good games. Right before McCovey comes up, Willie Mays hits a double into the right field corner, but Roger Maris plays the ball well. And Matty Alou holds at third. And I think Willie Mays always said that he thought Alou should have scored there, and that would have at least tied the game, even if McCovey got out. So yeah, 62 is a good choice. Did you have anything else to say on it?
Not particularly. One thing I did think that was interesting that I saw when I was looking this up, that during the 1981 Major League Baseball strike, the Giants radio, WKNBR, rebroadcast Game 7, but then edited the play at the end so that it was a base hit, and the Giants won. It said, electronically re-editing NBC radio announcer George Kell's description to make it sound as if McCovey's ninth-inning liner had gotten past Richardson, with Alou and Mays scoring to win the game and series for San Francisco. So I just thought, with Game 7, sort of a classic game, if not one that has the drama of a walk-off home run or anything like that. And then, the different aspect of it's the Giants in San Francisco, their first World Series out there and only one for a very long time. It's Mantle against Mays one more time. I don't know. I kind of, the East Coast, West Coast thing, first time the Yankees, they were in the first time the Yankees would have played in the World Series on the West Coast.
Hall of Famers, the 3 you'd expect for the Yankees: Yogi Berra, Whitey Ford, Mickey Mantle. And then for the Giants, Mays, McCovey, Orlando Cepeda, and Juan Marichal, the great pitcher. So, yeah, I can see that. Let me just sort of compare that to the one that I chose. We both ended up, maybe we were disappointed that it was sort of the end of the 40-year Yankee runs because we both picked Yankees. 64 for me, by the way, Hall of Famers in that one. Berra is actually the manager of the Yankees. He's retired as a player. It's just Ford and Mantle, and then it's Bob Gibson and Lou Brock for the Cardinals. This is the last World Series of the Yankee dynasty. The Yankees had been going to World Series, winning pennants and going to World Series, essentially 1 out of every 2 years since Babe Ruth had come in 45 years earlier. I went with 64 because, first of all, there's a lot of close games. It's Yankees win Game 3 2-1 when Mickey Mantle hits a home run off of Barney Schultz to give the win to Jim Bouton in Game 3 and put the Yankees ahead 2-1. Jim Bouton later said that was his favorite moment in his entire career. That home run breaks Babe Ruth's record of 16 home runs. Mantle ends up with 18 home runs, World Series home runs in his entire career. Game 4 is another 1-run game. The Yankees blow a 3-0 lead on an error by Bobby Richardson, which enables a grand slam by Ken Boyer, the Cardinal third baseman who had been MVP that year. And in fact, his brother, Clete Boyer, is the starting third baseman for the Yankees in the 64 World Series. And then Game 7, the Yankees, Game 5 rather, is an extra inning game. The Cardinals win 5-2, but it's an extra inning game. They go into the 10th inning, tied at 2, and then do you know who hits a 3-run home run in the 10th inning for the Cardinals? Tim McCarver hits a 3-run home run for the Cardinals. Incidentally, Tim McCarver, you know Tim McCarver's backup catcher is in that World Series?
Is it Euchre?
It's Euchre, yeah. So two future Hall of Famers, or two future Hall of Fame broadcasters, I should say, at catcher, Euchre and Tim McCarver. So that's game 5. And then in Game 7, which pitched by Bob Gibson, who had pitched and won Game 2, and then pitched and lost Game 2, and then pitched and won Game 5. Bob Gibson is the starting pitcher for Game 7, and the Yankees are down big. They're down 7-3. That's not too big, I guess, but they're going into the World Series, or the bottom of the 9th. But then Clete Boyer hits a home run. Phil Linz hits a home run to make it a little interesting, 7-5. But then Gibson gets Bobby Richardson out and ends the Yankees' last World Series appearance for over a decade. Gibson in his 3 starts pitches 9 innings, 10 innings, and does he pitch a complete game in his Game 2 start? I'm gonna guess he doesn't, because the Yankees win 8-3. No, he's out after 8 innings. I believe that's
only 8 innings,
and I think that's the only. And we talked about this when we did the in memoriam for him. I'm pretty sure that he starts 3 games in all 3 World Series that he pitches: 64, 67, 68. I'm pretty sure that Game 2 of 64 is the only time he comes out of the game. He pitches complete games in his next 8 World Series starts, which is just absolutely insane. So I think I'm willing to go with you on 62 because it ends with such an epic moment. But just like in the 50s, you can't really go wrong with either.
Yeah, the other ones, 65, 67, 68, not a lot of close games in those 3 series. And in 65 and 67, you get the sense that the team that was clearly better, again, I can't look at this through the eyes of, it was 20 years before I was born, but like 68 was an upset. The other 2 were pretty clearly the better team winning ultimately. So that's why I kind of, but to me, it was between 62 and 64 as well. But, those were 7-game series that I didn't want to shortchange really. So are you ready to move into the 70s?
Yes, let's move into the 1970s.
All right, here we go. 1970, Orioles over Reds in 5. 71, Pirates over Orioles in 7. 72, A's over Reds in 7. 73, A's over Mets in 7. 74, A's over Dodgers in 5. 75, Reds over Red Sox in 7. 76, Reds over Yankees in 4. 77 and 78, Yankees over Dodgers in 8. Or excuse me, Yankees over Dodgers in 6 both times. And in 79, the Pirates over the Orioles in 7. So you had 7-game series in 71, 72, 73, 75, and 79.
So it's your turn here. And
I mean, I don't see. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I don't see how you cannot go with 76. Yankees back in the World Series. No, 70. I went with 75. The Reds and the Red Sox. If not, I mean, this is going to be there's going to be a theme for the next two of them, at least to me. A 7-game series with one of the most classic games of all time is going to be tough to beat, with all due respect to those A's teams and the Pirates over the Orioles at the beginning and the end of the decade. But, you know, Red Sox back in the World Series for the first time in 10 years against the Big Red Machine. You got a 1-run game in game 2, 1-run game in game 3, 1-run game in game 4. And then in game 6, you have a 1-run 12-inning game that, you know, produces produces one of the most famous 5 images in baseball history, you would have to say. And I don't know if it's number 5. Game with all kinds of classic moments. A game that I think you have to say for 90 years was the high watermark of Boston baseball. Really, or Red Sox baseball, I guess. You know, really the biggest moment of the quote unquote curse of the Bambino era was this game 6. And then for good measure, a game 7 with a blown 3-run lead and a run in the top of the 9th that wins the game. So I have a hard time finding anything that beats this series for drama, for star power, for an absolutely iconic moments, and then good triumphing in the end.
Meaning the Red Sox lost.
Yes.
So, yeah, I went with the 1975 World Series. Interestingly enough, other than Fisk, well, let me read the Hall of Famers first. For the Reds, it's Johnny Bench, Joe Morgan, Tony Perez. For the Red Sox, it's Carlton Fisk and Carl Yastrzemski, and then Jim Rice is also on that team, but he's hurt. He does not play in this World Series.
And also, when you point out the Hall of Fame, it's weird. 2 of the guys who were talking.
Well, that's what I was just about to get to.
Yeah. Okay. Go ahead.
So, the MVP of this series is Pete Rose, and who just passed away about a week ago as we're recording this, and then probably the best pitcher of this series is Louis Tiant for the Red Sox, who, as we're recording this on October 8th, just passed away today. Those are probably the 2 biggest stars of this. Now, obviously, it's hard to get away from Fisk's epic moment, but as far as like game in and game out performers in this series, those might be the 2 best. Just to kind of run through some key moments here. Game 1 at Fenway is a 6-0 Red Sox victory over the Reds. It's a complete game shutout for Tiant. Tiant, who had come to the U.S. from Cuba and left his family, his parents. His parents are actually at Fenway Park to watch him pitch because they got some sort of a special visa, which I guess must have been cool for him, but also potentially kind of weird, given that, like, you're getting ready to pitch in the World Series and you, like, all of a sudden your family you haven't seen in forever is there, and then, like, you know, they're going to be going back to Cuba and you're not going to see them again for a very long time. So that might be difficult. Game 2 is a 1-run Reds.
Real quick on game 1, it's a 6-0 final score, but it's 0-0 until the bottom of the 7th.
Okay. I hadn't realized that.
So, you know, again, not close at the end, but close for a lot of it.
Game 2, the Reds rally for 2 to win the game in the 9th off of Boston relievers Boston closer Dick Drago, who blows the save, gets the loss. Game 3 is an extra inning game, 6-5. Reds win, and the big thing in that game is that there's a catcher's interference call that people think should have been made in the 10th inning against the Reds that doesn't get made. Game 4, another complete game win by Tiant. He gets Joe Morgan out to end the game on his 163rd pitch of the game, which is absolutely just insane. Reds
on
come
what
back.
would have been our mother's 20th birthday, actually, believe it or not.
That's a good point. I don't know if she'll want us saying that, but okay.
Nobody, they don't do the math. I don't say how old she is. I just say that she turned 20 in 1975. So anyway, go ahead.
Game 5 is a relatively comfortable victory for the Reds, 6-2. Then, sort of like in the 1962 World Series, there's an extended rain delay because, much like Cincinnati, Boston is cold and raining in late October, which means that the Red Sox can go back to Tiant for Game 6. I don't know how much we really want to say about this game. I think that we probably should do 1975 next year as an anniversary, because in addition to this in baseball, I know what's that? That's a Steelers championship season. That's the first. I think is that the first Cowboy Steeler Super Bowl? I'm sure there were things going on in boxing in 75. So we should probably
had one of the Broad Street Bully Flyers teams, the last Flyers championship in 75.
So we probably should dig into that more. Basically, the two big things you need to know about that Game 6 is that Bernie Carbo, who had been a Red earlier in the 70s, comes up as a pinch hitter for the Red Sox in the bottom of the 8th with the Red Sox down to their last 4 outs and down by 3 runs, and he hits a home run off of Cincinnati reliever Raleigh Eastwick. The game then goes scoreless all the way to the bottom of the 12th when Carlton Fisk hits his famous home run. And then Game 7, the Red Sox, and this like you said, doesn't really get talked about because of what happened, the game before necessarily, but the Red Sox are up 3-0 going into the 6th inning. Joe Morgan gets the game-winning hit in the top of the 9th off Red Sox reliever Jim Burton to give the Reds their first of 2 back-to-back championships and send the Red Sox home with yet another heartbreaking World Series loss.
Yeah, so I mean, there were some other good series, but I just hard to find one you would put on this list above 75.
No, I mean, I think, and who knows, we'd have to look through and kind of analyze every single one, and but it is widely considered the best World Series of all time. I think 5 of these games are 1-run games, if I'm not mistaken. Game 2, 3, 4, 6, and 7 are all 1-run games. So there you have it.
And just you can't put enough of a fine point on like an iconic seminal moment, to the point, and it sounds silly, but 20 years later, that game is a big focal point of the movie Good Will Hunting. Yeah. Just because it's such a, especially for a Red Sox team that had such a lull for, many years. And I have a feeling we're about to talk about part of that in a minute. But, I think it, in terms of pure drama, it has to outstrip anything else in the 70s.
I knew a guy who had a friend, my friend Matt, who has a friend who has a tattoo of Carlton Fisk waving the ball fair. So it's, probably less so now that they've won what did they win? 4 World Series since then, 04, 07, 13, and 18. They've won 4 World Series since then, so it's probably not quite as big of a deal, but yeah, that is considered one of the big moments in Boston baseball, or really all of Boston sports history.
All right, we're on to the 80s. It's morning again in America. Phillies over Royals 4-2 in 1980. 1981, Dodgers over Yankees in 6. 82, Cardinals over Brewers in 7. 83, Orioles over Phillies in 5. 84, Tigers over Padres in 5. 85, Royals over Cardinals in 7. 86, Mets over Red Sox in 7. 87, Twins over Cardinals in 7. 88, Dodgers over A's in 5. And 89, A's over Giants in 4. So 7-game series in 82, 85, 86, and 87.
And it just occurs to me, we've talked about quite a few of these on the podcast before. We talked about 80 when we did our episode about Philly sports in 1980. We actually have done 2 different episodes on 82 because we did the episodes about the book, the Suds series book, which is a great book that I'd recommend checking out. And then we also did a 1982 yearly retrospective. We did an 84 yearly retrospective. We did an 86 yearly retrospective. So we've done quite a bit on a lot of these. I was a little tempted by the 85 Royals Cardinals series, the Don Denkinger game in Game 6, but Game 7 of that series was a 7-0 or like 11-0 blowout in Game 7. So I think we do have to go with another heartbreaking Red Sox loss in 1986, this time to the Mets.
Yeah, and for largely a lot of the same reasons, just to go into it though. Game 1 is a 1-0 win for the Red Sox at Shea Stadium. They get a run in the top of the 7th inning, and they end up winning 1-0.
The only run in that game is an unearned run caused by an error by Tim Tuffle for the Mets.
Yep, letting a ground ball from Rich Gedman go through his legs, allowing Jim Rice to score from second. Strawberry walks to lead off the 9th, and then Schiraldi works out of a jam. So that's Game 1. Game 2, the Red Sox win big at Shea Stadium 9-3. So they head back to Fenway Park with a chance to win their first World Series in this time would have been 68 years if they can win 2 or 3 at home. They get killed in Game 3, 7-1. Mets jump on them 4-0 to start the game, and don't really look back from there. Game 4, the Mets win 6-2, and again they're up 6-0, and the Red Sox get 2 runs. We go to Game 5, and this is a much closer game. It's a 4-2 win for the Red Sox. The Mets get a run in the 8th and a run in the 9th to crawl back into it. But Hurst strikes out Lenny Dykstra to end the game, and the Red Sox take a 3-2 lead in the series, going back to New York.
And then you get Game 6, classic, and this is another one that when we did the year, we dove into it pretty deeply, but just to sort of give you the broad strokes, starting pitchers, Roger Clemens starts for the Red Sox, and Bob Ojeda, who I believe Ojeda had been a Red Sox, right? Yeah, Ojeda had been a Red Sox since the year up until the year before, so he is the starting pitcher going up against his former team as they're trying to win their first World Series in what's it at this point, 68 years. And if you watch the broadcast of that game, it's up on YouTube. You can get it different places. They're starting with the whole, and they're interviewing people who, I was 8 years old when they won it the last time. This was supposed to be, you got the Roger Clemens, who had been not just the Cy Young Award winner for the Red Sox, but the MVP in 86. You got this guy coming up. He's pitching. Everybody thinks that the Red Sox are going to win. The game is tied 3-3 after 9 innings. And there's the whole thing with whether or not Clemens asked out of the game with John McNamara and that cold thing. But in the top of the 10th, with Rick Aguilera pitching for the Mets, Dave Henderson, who had hit the heroic home run against Anaheim, against the California Angels in the ALCS to keep that series alive and eventually send the Red Sox to the World Series, hits another home run. So now it's like, is Dave Henderson going to do it twice? There, and sort of the story is that at this point, parents all over New England are waking up their children to see this. Wade Boggs doubles to left with 2 outs, and then Marty Barrett singles him home. So now it's a 5-3 game. They've got insurance runs, and then they go into the bottom of the 10th. And I'll just run through it real quick because a lot of people probably know it. Wally Backman flies out. Keith Hernandez flies out. Gary Carter singles. Kevin Mitchell, who's in the dressing room getting undressed, is told that they need him to come pinch hit. He comes up, he throws his pants on, he comes to pinch hit. He singles. Then Ray Knight singles to score Carter. Then Mookie Wilson comes up with Mitchell on third and Knight on first. Bob Stanley comes in to replace Calvin Schiraldi. Wild pitch. Ties the game. Knight goes to second, and then Mookie hits it to first. Buckner makes the error. They go in to game 7. There's another rain delay. They decide that instead of going with their normal starter, who would have been Oil Can Boyd, that they can go at Bruce Hurst because of the extra day of rest. Bruce Hurst gets Oil Can Boyd gets really drunk, and they have to hide him out in the locker room so the manager doesn't know. Red Sox jump out to a 3-0 lead in this game, but then in the bottom of the 6th, pinch hitter Lee Mazzilli, who had been back with the Mets after having been gone for years, singles. Mookie Wilson singles. Tim Tuffle walks. Keith Hernandez hits a 2 RBI single. And then Gary Carter plates pinch runner Wally Backman on a fielder's choice. So the Mets tie the game and then go out to a 6-3 lead in the bottom of the 7th on a home run by Ray Knight and some RBIs by a couple of other Mets. They close the gap to 6-5 when Dwight Evans hits a 2-run home run. But then in the bottom of the 8th, they get some insurance runs, Darryl Strawberry home runs, and they actually get an RBI single in the bottom of the 8th from Jesse Orosco, who's their closer, so who probably never batted all season. He makes it 8-5, then goes back out on the mound to close the game. Mets win, Red Sox lose. Mets still haven't won one. Red Sox will get back in 2004, and Red Sox haven't lost a World Series that they've been in ever since. They've won their last 4. Just real quick, the Hall of Famers in this one, just Gary Carter for the Mets, although if you'd asked anybody back then, they would have definitely thought that both Gooden and Strawberry were going. And for the Red Sox, Wade Boggs and Jim Rice, who finally gets to play in a World Series after missing the 75 series with an injury.
Yeah, so I mean, it's hard to really argue against any other series against this when you consider the epicness of Game 6. I think when we did our 1986 episode, I posited, and I think you agreed with me, it's got to be the most famous baseball game of all time, realistically. 85, the most memorable part of 80. Was it 85 with the ump mistake, or is that 87?
85 with Denkinger, right? Yeah.
Yeah, it's 85. So, there's a part of it that I think 87 didn't one of those series have the thing where like they should have ruled the guy for pushing the other guy off the base or something.
That sounds vaguely familiar, but I don't remember which one.
Yeah, but anyway, what I'm saying is these pale in comparison to the Mookie Wilson, Bill Buckner game, and then you have the Game 7, the fact that it's New York against Boston in a World Series. I think 86 has to get it by a decent margin over those other 7-game series.
I agree.
All right, coming down. Well, we still got 4 left.
4 more.
Should we? What's that?
I said 4 more.
4 more. Should I move into the 90s now?
I think you should move into the 90s.
All right. 90, Cincinnati Reds over the A's in 4. 91, Twins over the Braves in 7. 92, Blue Jays over the Braves in 6. 93, Blue Jays over the Phillies in 6. No series in 1994 due to the strike. 95, Braves over the Indians in 6. 96, Yankees over the Braves in 6. 97, Marlins over the Indians in 7. 98, Yankees over the Padres in 4. And 99, Yankees over the Braves in 4. So 91 and 97 are your two 7-game series to choose from if you go that route.
And I think it's your turn to give your selection first.
I went with 91.
Me too.
I mean, when you talk about Game 7, and I mean Game 7 of the 97 series ended on a walk-off home run as well. But when you talk about this series, and there's plenty of other. Game 6 was decided in 11 innings. There was 3 extra inning games in this series and 2 other 1-run games as well. But just to talk about the last 2 games, Game 6 was decided in the 11th inning on a walk-off by Minnesota. And then Game 7 went 10 innings, and it was a 1-0 game. Jack Morris threw that complete game shutout, and the Twins end up winning. So 2 extra inning 1-run games won by the home team. As a matter of fact, the home team won every game in this series. It had to beat out 97 in my opinion.
So Hall of Famers here for the Twins. It's Kirby Puckett and Jack Morris, you mentioned, who had already won a World Series in 84 with the Tigers. And then for the Braves, it's just Tom Glavine and John Smoltz. They're a couple years away. Greg Maddux is still in Chicago at this point. And yeah, like you said, basically every game here, or almost every game, is sort of epic. The other thing I should point out, both teams were worst to first. Both teams had been in last place in their division the previous year, which was the first time that had ever happened. So just to sort of run through here, like I said, Minnesota wins Game 2 in the bottom of the 8th inning. Journeyman first baseman by the name of Scott Leyes, who had actually made an error earlier in the game at first base, hits a home run off of Tom Glavine to win Game 2 for the Twins and prevent put them up 2-0. And then, like you said, goes back to Atlanta. Atlanta wins 3 in a row. They win 5-4 in Game 3 on a game-winning hit by Mark Lemke. Game 4 is Jack Morris versus John Smoltz, 2 future Hall of Famers. Another 1-run win for the Atlanta Braves. This time it's Mark Lemke scoring the game-winning run on a sacrifice fly. Game 5 is a blowout. It's the only blowout in the series, 14-5. But then they go back to Minnesota. Another extra inning game, Game 6. Kirby Puckett hits a game-winning home run off of Charlie Leibrandt, and that is him rounding second is immortalized in a statue at Target Field. I believe that's right. Let me just verify that. Yep. The statue, just outside Gate 34 in honor of Kirby Puckett. And this is also this Game 6. This is the birthplace of Jack Buck's famous "We'll see you tomorrow night," because Puckett's home run ensured that there was going to be a Game 7. And his son, Joe Buck, when he was doing World Series games, used that a couple of times. He also used a variation in the 04 ALCS when David Ortiz won the game for the Red Sox after midnight, and he said, "We'll see you later tonight." So if you're wondering, that's the birth of that. And then Game 7, like you said, is Morris versus Smoltz, scoreless through 9. Morris basically refuses to come out of the game. Glavine is eventually relieved by future Yankee Mike Stanton, and an injured Twin by the name of Gene Larkin gets the game-winning hit in the 10th inning of that game to win it for the Minnesota Twins. Their second World Series championship in 5 years. They've not even been to a World Series since, and I'm pretty sure they haven't even been to an LCS. Now, maybe they have, maybe once or twice in the Maurer years. But anyway, their last
they got
World
there in
Series.
02. They got there in 02. They lost to the Angels in 02.
Okay, so they've been a couple times.
Then, but yeah, they've been there at least once. But yeah, so that's that's the answer for me in 91. And to be honest, it's a much more highly. I think if it was different teams involved or different, it should be a much more highly regarded series.
That's one of those World Series that like real baseball people, like people who've been in baseball, like I'm not him specifically saying this, but like, the Buster Olneys of the world, the guys who've been observing and writing about baseball for 40 or 50 years, Tyler Kepner, who wrote the World Series book, who's a sports writer for the New York Times, those kind of guys, like the baseball lifers, always talk about that as possibly the greatest World Series of all time.
All right, so we're getting close here. Are we ready to make the jump into the 21st century?
We are, and I don't think we're going to like it, but go for it anyway.
All right, 21st century, starting in the year 2000, things start off well enough. Yankees over Mets 4-1. 2001, Diamondbacks over Yankees in 7. 2002, Angels over Giants in 7. 03, Marlins over Yankees in 6. 04, Red Sox over Cardinals in 4. 05, White Sox over Astros in 4. 06, Cardinals over Tigers in 5. 07, Red Sox over Rockies in 4. 08, Phillies over Rays in 5. And 09, Yankees over Phillies in 6. So only 2 7-game series, lots of sweeps. We've kind of entered the era of not very good World Series. But 01, 02, 7-game series back to back. There's really no way not to choose the 2001 World Series. There's a lot to talk about with the 2001 World Series. It's the first series since 91 that the home team wins all 7 games.
Mm-hmm.
It's in a lot of ways the end of that Yankee dynasty. Even though they were back in a World Series 2 years later, it was a much different team. It's, one thing that gets overlooked. They're not overlooked, but the Diamondbacks were in their 4th year as a franchise. An expansion franchise won a championship in their 4th year. And I know the Marlins had just done it in their 5th year in 97. But, this felt kind of different. You had the great games in the 3 straight really close, crazy, dramatic games at Yankee Stadium that the Yankees won games 3, 4, and 5. And then you had the epic game 7 that the Diamondbacks won. And not, we're going to talk about this World Series. We need to at least mention it. And, my personal feelings are that it is hard to divorce the reality of this being immediately post 9/11 and, being in New York, and that there was certainly some, you have to acknowledge some connection to world events with all this. I get a little bit tired of it especially as a New Yorker, when you hear about, they were like healing the city's wounds. And I'm like, that's a little much. But you have to also, this was the 6 weeks after 9/11 or whatever. They're playing this World Series in New York and, having these dramatic games, and the president's there. And then you go out and have game 7. So I'm sorry to the Angels and the Rally Monkey the next year and Barry Bonds. It's hard to beat 01, even if the ending was not, something I was thrilled with as a sophomore in high school, who had unfortunately only seen 4 championships in the previous 5 years.
All right, several things. I'll kind of get to the 9/11 stuff last. First of all, just real quick, World Series Hall of Famers. The only one for the Diamondbacks is Randy Johnson. For the Yankees, it's Derek Jeter and Mariano Rivera, and then also Mike Mussina, who had just signed as a free agent with the Yankees going into the 01 World Series. Mussina never wins a World Series with the Yankees. I think the difference between the Diamondbacks and the Marlins is even though they had Randy Johnson and Curt Schilling, neither of whom had come up with the team, it felt a little more organic than the Marlins just basically going out and buying a bunch of players for 1 year. They'd been in the playoffs 2 years ago against the Mets. They'd lost in the LDS when Buck Showalter was the manager. They'd been a good team for a few years. This didn't feel like, and I think even when the Marlins won in 97, it was kind of widely understood that there was going to be a fire sale right after the season. This felt like a team that was just going to be a good baseball team, and they were decent for another couple of years. Yeah, you really kind of have three epic games, like you said. Game 4, the Yankees get home runs from Tino and then from Derek Jeter in extra innings. Game 5, it's a home run by Scott Brocious and then a game-winning hit by Alfonso Soriano to plate Chuck Knobloch. The thing about the Yankees in this series, this kind of like in some ways this kind of like relates to the 9/11 thing in a weird way. This was not a very good Yankee team compared to what they'd been in previous years. Now, 98, they were amazing. 99, they were still very good. 2000, they kind of limped in, but then they were once they got into the postseason in 2000, it was closer series than it had been. But 2001, they were limping along. I mean, guys like Brocious, Knobloch, it was very clear they were at the end of the line for their Yankees.
O'Neill had either officially or unofficially announced his retirement.
Yeah. And you forget too, they lost the first 2 games of the ALCS, or the ALDS, I should say, at Yankee Stadium. They go into game 3 in Oakland against this Oakland team with Giambi and Tejada, and it's of course sort of considered the up-and-coming team. Jeter makes that incredible flip play. Yankees win that game. They win game 4. They go all the way back to New York and win game 5. And then in the LCS, they go against a Seattle team that had won, 116 games that year?
Mm-hmm.
Beat them in 5. So, yeah, obviously it wasn't helping the city heal from 9/11. But if you're ever going to make that sort of metaphor of being down, being counted out, going through things, and then sort of getting up off the mat and continuing to fight, continuing to win, it's really hard. If you're ever going to make an analogy like that, it's hard not to make that with this Yankee team.
So, yeah, I don't know how much you want to get into games 4 and 5, which were the crazy games. Game 4 was the game that went into November when they all after that went into November too, but that was when the Jeter hit the home run and made it 4-1 it, and they called it Mr. November because it was the first time the World Series had gone into November off Byung-Hyun Kim. And then the next day in game 5 in a 12-inning game, which I've said this before, and the Yankees did not hit in Arizona in games 1 and 2. They lost 9-1, and the 1 run was in the first inning. And then the second game they lost 4-0. And then the game 3 they won 3-1. And in game 4 they were down 3-1 in the bottom of the 9th inning, and they put up a graphic. And my brother will probably roll his eyes because he's heard me say this a million times.
No, I love it.
They put up a graphic as the Yankees were going into the bottom of the 9th, and it said the Yankees have scored less runs through the first however many innings of a World Series than any team since the 1919 White Sox. And the first thing you think of with that is like, Jesus, 82 years ago, whatever. And then Joe Buck just goes, and the White Sox weren't exactly trying that year. So they had not only the last team that had scored less runs than them up to that point in the series was trying to lose. And then they win game 4. They do basically a carbon. I always forget who hit which games, which night, because it's like the carbon copy in game 5, except, a couple innings later. Go ahead.
And when Brocious hits that home run off of Byung-Hyun Kim just gets this look on his face like he cannot believe this just happened to him again. I've never seen a pitcher on the mound make that face before or since. And I just remember as a fan, as a freshman in college, sitting at my dorm and just being like, they're just going to do this again. They are going to, for the second straight night, they're going to do this. And it was just crazy that this team was doing this again. Then, of course, they go back to Arizona, and you think they're going to put the crown jewel in the dynasty in Game 6, and they get absolutely obliterated by Randy Johnson and the Astros, or then the Diamondbacks, I should say. Andy Pettitte pitches horribly, which for all his good postseason starts, Andy Pettitte had some really bad ones too. 96, Game 1, 0-1. Andy Pettitte had some bad postseason starts too. But then Game 7, Clemens against Schilling. Clemens pitches great. They tie the game in the top of the 7th, and then in the top of the 8th, Alfonso Soriano, a rookie, hits a leadoff home run off of Schilling, makes it 2-1. Rivera comes in the 8th, gets 3 outs. He gives up a hit, but he strikes out the side. And then just real quick, bottom of the 9th, Mark Gray singles. Damian Miller hits the ball that gets famously caught in the dirt, leading from the pitcher's mound to the home plate, which had been designed by former Yankee and former Diamondback manager Buck Showalter. So Rivera throws the ball into the outfield. So now there's runners on first and second. There's a bunt, force out at third. So now it's first and second. But then Tony Womack hits a double. Pinch runner, Midre Cummings scores. I actually don't remember this. Rivera hits Craig Counsell with a pitch. And then, so then I guess with runners on first, and was it runners on
the base?
That loads the bases. You're right. That loads the bases. And then with the infield drawn in with only 1 out, Luis Gonzalez hits that bloop single, and Jay Bell, who had been the guy who bunted a few batters previous, scores. So, yeah, the Diamondbacks kind of win one the way the Yankees had been winning them for the last 5 or 6 years.
All right. Last full decade to go. You ready?
Let's do it.
All right. The 2010s, the teens, if you will. We start with 2010, and we have the San Francisco Giants over the Texas Rangers in 5. In 2011, Cardinals over Rangers in 7. 12, Giants over Tigers in 4. 13, Red Sox over Cardinals in 6. 14, Giants over Royals in 7. 15, Royals over Mets in 5. 16, Cubs over Indians in 7. 17, Astros over Dodgers in 7. 18, Red Sox over Dodgers in 5. And 19, Nationals over Astros in 7. So 7-game series in 2011, 2014, 2016, 2017, and 2019.
So it's your turn here. I kind of struggled with where to go for this one. I feel like there's a couple different directions one can choose, but I'd like to hear what you say.
There's one answer to this. It's the 2000s. It's 2016.
Really?
It's the Cubs. It's the Cubs and the Indians. It's the two teams with the longest droughts in sports, or in baseball. One considerably longer than the other one. Cleveland having just their long citywide sports drought having ended just a couple of months earlier with the Cavaliers winning a championship. Meanwhile, the Cubs, the streak is now at 108 years, and they play. Cleveland takes a 3-1 lead in the series. If you want to knock it at all, you could say that not a lot of these games were real close, although Game 3 was a 1-0 game that gave Cleveland a 2-1 lead in the series. Cleveland wins Game 4, big to go up 3-1 in the series. Game 5 at Wrigley Field, the Cubs win 3-2. They hold on, they stave off elimination. They win at Wrigley for their last game in front of the Cubs fans all year. Game 6, they win big. And then Game 7 is this epic game at Progressive Field. It's tied at 1. The Cubs go ahead. How the hell much were they ahead? 1-2, 1-1. 3-1, 5-3. They're up 6-3 in the eighth. Cleveland ties it in the eighth at 6-6. It starts to pour. They go on for a brief rain delay with the game after. So the Cleveland ties it in the sixth. After 9, the skies just open up out of nowhere. There's the shortest rain delay I've ever seen, which is 17 minutes. They come back out, and the Cubs end up winning 8-7 in dramatic fashion. It's their first World Series since, would that be the Teddy Roosevelt administration? Or was Taft the president?
1908 would have been the last year of the Teddy Roosevelt administration.
Yeah, so there's barely anybody even alive. Probably very few people who, certainly that would remember. It's what it lacks in, games 3 and 2 and 5 not being particularly close or whatever. Although game 3 was close, it makes up for in the nature of the teams involved and the theater of game 7. And, that's my answer. I know where you're going to go with this, but that's my answer.
Where do you think I'm going to go with it?
You're going to go with 2019.
No. I wasn't going to go with 2019. No, because honestly, those games, all the games that that were played at Nats Park, keep in mind also that's the first time that the opposite has happened, where the home team lost every game, which was really crazy.
Yeah, that was insane.
But no, all three. I mean, the Nats were basically not in any of the games that they were in 19. So no, I was not going to go with that. I actually had originally put 11 because that was that game 6 is one of the greatest games in the history of Major League Baseball. Maybe one of the greatest games in the history of certainly in the history of the World Series. But one of the one of the greatest games in the history of baseball. I think I might have overly leaned on that. You're right. That 2016 game, they go in for the rain delay. Jason Hayward gives them a pep talk during this 17-minute rain delay. It's the first Cubs victory. So, yeah, I mean, and it's getting late here, and we don't need to go into all these hypotheticals. There are other series, if this was in a different decade, 01, 91, any of the ones really, 75, any of the ones that were decided in the ninth inning of game 7 or extra innings of game 7, I might have put over this 16 because some of the earlier games were not as good. But yeah, an epic game 7 beats an epic game 6, I guess I would say, especially when you factor in what it meant.
And one series that does bear mentioning, even though game 3 and game 7 were really the only close games, that 2014, that game 7 in 2014, San Francisco against Kansas City.
Yeah, I remember watching that game.
That was a wild game where they brought in Bumgarner at the end. And early in the game, Hopewell Junction, John Jay legend Joe Panic made a really huge play in that game. But I you can certainly make the case for 11 based on what happened. But I just, with the drama of game 7 and the teams involved and the ultimate winner, I had to go with 16.
And I think that's justified.
All right. I made a pick for the last decade. I'm assuming you did too.
I did too. I mean, there's only 4 years, but
5. Oh no, 4.
4.
Yeah, 4. You're right. So just to read it, the current decade we're in, 2020, Dodgers over Rays in 6, 21, Braves over Astros in 6, 22, Astros over Phillies in 6, and then last year, Rangers over Diamondbacks in 5. 3 6-game series and a 5-game series to choose from so far in the decade.
Yeah, and even though I try and block out everything pretty much from that year, but especially anything in sports from that year, I actually went with 2020 because Game 6 was kind of exciting. Most specifically, the whole idea that Blake Snell was really pitching well, but the excuse me, the Rays manager, who's it, Kevin Cash, pulls him out anyway. He's not happy about it. let me just pull up the recap of Game 6. Tampa's got a 1-0 lead I believe that's when they pull Snell in the sixth. Yeah, Snell had allowed only 2 hits while throwing 73 pitches and walking none in 5 1/3 innings, and then the relief pitcher they bring in immediately gives up a double to Mookie Betts and then a wild pitch. So yeah, the others were, again, none of these are really anything crazy. It is worth noting that the MVP of this series is Corey Seager, who 3 years later wins it with the Rangers. He's the only guy to win World Series MVP in both leagues. So that was where I went. I wasn't, there's the 2020s have not given us anything epic. They haven't given us any 7-game series, so that's a good place to start. But I went there. I just 2021 was that was the Braves and the Astros, correct?
Yes.
And that was a 4-2. But the Braves won that game 6, 7-0. And then 22 was Philly and Houston. Philly had that one game where they hit all the home runs because the Astros that was Game 3. The Astros were tipping their pitches, and that was another one where
Right.
Decent enough series. And then last year was kind of a bleh, if we're being honest. So yeah, It's the 2020 World Series. I'm just looking here if there were other 8-7. The Rays win 8-7 in Game 4. Was that? Yeah, that was a good game. So yeah, I think that was. I have a note here. Brett Phillips gets the game-winning hit off of Kenley Jansen.
Yeah, the Wikipedia for the article that I just had up has a picture of him above Game 4, and he's wearing a minor league uniform. It says Brett Phillips,
you know what it was? I think he had never appeared in the major leagues before.
Because it's like Brett Phillips pictured here with the Omaha Storm Chasers. I'm like, why? Why is he picked? Why is it not a picture from that game?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure. Oh no, that's not right. Unless this isn't the right. I don't know what this is, but there's something. Yeah, I'd have to take a second to look this up because I have something there too about first postseason hit off Jansen. I don't know what I meant by that. So yeah, something was going on there.
Yes, and the series was played in Texas every game. So
yes, this is true. That was that strange COVID. Hold on here. First player since Kirk Gibson in 1988 to have a walk-off hit with 2 outs with his team trailing in the World Series. Yeah, I don't know what the minor league uniform has to do with it. That might just be, the picture they chose. But yeah, so yeah, there's not a lot for the 2020s yet. We've got 5 more years to go, 6 more years to go. So maybe it'll give us something more excited. But for now, the strange pandemic year of 2020 gets the Duke.
Yeah, you'd like to think one of these next 6 will be better than what we've seen so far and can supplant that on this list by the time the decade is over.
Especially because, like you said, 19, 16, 14, 11, there were some really good ones in the previous decade.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, this was good, and it was a little long, but not nearly as long as it could have been.
Not nearly as long as it would have been if I hadn't put a guideline in place. We would still be in the early 50s. And then in Game 5 in 52, Stengel decides to pit. We would still be in the early 50s.
No, I had actually thought that the decades thing was the best way to go about it, even before you brought it up. So this was good. This was fun. It's always good to dive into World Series history. There's more material there than any mere podcast can convey.
And we are not a lesser observer. All right. Should we close this? We've been on for a while.
Yeah, we should. Well, we will catch you all later. Hopefully this will post sometime around when the World Series is going on, and hope you all enjoy it. Hope you all have enjoyed an October full of baseball, and we thank you as always for listening to Hello Old Sports. But until then, I'm Dan Newman.
And I'm Andrew Newman. Goodbye, old sports.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com. Hey there, sports history fan. This is Arnie Chapman, aka the Football History Dude, and I hope that you enjoyed this recent episode presented by the Sports History Network and were able to learn some good old-fashioned sports history knowledge nuggets. I started the Sports History Network back in 2020 with the mission to help podcasters find a community of like-minded sports history nerds, as well as helping aspiring podcasters to start their own shows. We have a little bit over 30 shows on the network right now covering all sorts of sports history, but as far as I'm concerned, we're just at the toothpick in the ocean moment, that can't even figure it out because there's so much more coming. We wanted to create the ultimate headquarters for sports yesteryear, starting with Podcast Network and our website, but we're going to continue to move into other mediums as well. And here's the cool part, because we want you to be part of our team. So if you're interested in starting your own podcast, or maybe being a guest on one of our shows, or who knows, maybe even writing an article for us over on the website. Seriously, all you gotta do is reach out to us on the contact page over at sportshistorynetwork.com. You can be as technologically savvy as a Neanderthal tapping on a stone trying to figure out this whole hieroglyphics thing back in the day. Again, it doesn't matter, because even if you don't understand the whole podcast space, we have a production team that can pretty much help you out with doing everything. All you gotta do, head over to sportshistorynetwork.com, head to the contact page, fill it out. That message goes right to me, and I'll reach out to you as soon as I can. But for now, dude, I'm through if you're through.